she finds out before you die, then I'll accelerate the timeline. It wouldn't take much. A medication error. A pillow held a little too long. I'll make everyone believe Clara finally snapped and smothered you in a mercy killing.
Those cunning words, my daughter-in-law Grace's words to my husband, the foolish man who had fallen for her seductive lies, whom she had drugged into a deep sleep, crackled through the church speakers at what was supposed to be my husband's funeral. Her face went white as a corpse when she heard her own voice echo off the stone walls, confessing her murderous calculation to a room full of witnesses. She screamed at me then, wild-eyed and desperate, "You can't do this to me." But I could, and I did, because mercy, real mercy, burns only the lies. They thought I was just some tired old hospice nurse, too worn down by 30 years of death and grief to notice what was rotting right under my own roof. They underestimated me. Big mistake. By the time Grace realized I'd been 3 steps ahead of her all along, recording every whisper, documenting every forged signature, she was already caught in a trap of her own making. And Martin, my dying husband who betrayed me, he confessed everything before his heart finally gave out. But by then, the truth was already spreading like wildfire through our quiet Vermont town. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it started, to the moment I first sensed something poisonous growing in the spaces between mercy and sin. Snow fell thick and silent over Willow Haven Hospice that December evening, the kind of snow that makes the world feel holy and pure. I'd spent 3 decades in these halls, guiding strangers through their final breaths, holding hands that trembled between life and whatever comes next. Death and I were old friends, comfortable, respectful. But when Martin became my patient, my husband of 42 years, now my responsibility, something shifted. Death started wearing a different face. One that smelled like expensive perfume and whispered lies in the dark. I noticed it first in the small things, the way Grace, my daughter-in-law, would lean too close when adjusting Martin's pillows, how her hand would linger on his wrist when checking his pulse, her fingers tracing slow circles on his papery skin. She'd hum while she worked, and one night I realized with a jolt. It was his favorite song, the one I used to sing to him when we were young and stupid and in love, the one only I knew. My chest went tight. A woman knows. Something primal and ancient wakes up inside you when another woman crosses certain lines. I told myself I was being paranoid, that grief was making me see shadows where there was only kindness. But the unease took root anyway, spreading through my gut like frost. Martin lay there in that narrow hospice bed, eyes half closed, but always watching, always aware. His body was failing, pancreatic cancer, stage 4, the kind that steals you piece by piece. But his mind was sharp enough to feel desire, sharp enough to betray. One night, I came back to the hospice unexpectedly. I'd forgotten my reading glasses. The hallway was dark except for the lamp in Martin's room, and through the half-open door I saw them, silhouettes. Grace's hand on his cheek, her lips close to his ear, whispering something I couldn't hear. His fingers twitched beneath hers. A movement I recognized from 42 years of marriage. The same twitch he'd had when we were newlyweds, when desire still ran hot between us. I stood there in the dark hallway, frozen, unable to breathe. Something inside me cracked, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, clean break, like ice splitting under pressure. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. I just watched as Grace smoothed back his thinning hair with a tenderness that should have been mine alone. Then she kissed his forehead, slow, deliberate, intimate. And I understood. This wasn't compassion. This was something else entirely. The mercy I'd offered to hundreds of dying strangers had made me blind to the rot growing in my own home. I walked backward down that hallway, careful not to let my shoes squeak on the linoleum. My hands were shaking so hard I had to grip the wall to steady myself. But I didn't cry. Not yet. Crying was for people who'd already lost, and I hadn't lost. Not yet. Because here's what Grace didn't know about hospice nurses. We're trained to see death coming from miles away. We know how to read the signs, how to measure time in breaths and heartbeats. We know how to plan, and I was already planning. Oh yes, the quiet, forgiving wife was about to become something much more dangerous. Winter pressed against the windows of Willow Haven that night, cold and patient. Inside, mercy was beginning to taste different. Thicker, heavier, like smoke. And in the darkness, I made myself a promise. Before this was over, they would both understand what real mercy looked like. It wouldn't be gentle, but it would be true. The next morning, I walked into Martin's room like nothing had changed, like I hadn't seen what I'd seen, like my world hadn't cracked open the night before. But everything smelled wrong. Her perfume, Grace's perfume. It was everywhere, soaked into Martin's pillowcase, clinging to the cotton blanket, hanging in the air like evidence. Something floral and expensive with an undertone of vanilla, the kind of scent that announces a woman's presence long before she enters a room and long after she leaves. I stood there holding fresh linens, breathing it in, feeling my stomach turn. This wasn't the faint trace of someone who'd visited briefly. This was the smell of hours spent close, intimate, wrong. Martin's eyes followed me as I moved around the bed. He couldn't speak anymore. The cancer had stolen that from him weeks ago, but his gaze held something I'd never seen before. Guilt, maybe, or defiance. Hard to tell which was worse. I stripped the sheets with mechanical precision, my nurse's training taking over when my emotions threatened to spill. The fabric felt warm where his body had been, and I had to force myself not to throw it all in the trash. Instead, I folded everything neatly, professionally, while rage simmered just beneath my skin. Grace was here late last night, I said to him, my voice steady and conversational, like we were discussing the weather. She's so devoted to you, Martin. So very attentive. His fingers twitched. That same twitch from the night before. My throat tightened, but I kept my face neutral, my movements calm. A good nurse never lets her patients see her fall apart. But inside I was screaming. The days that followed became a strange, silent torture. I watched them both with new eyes, cataloging every gesture, every glance, every moment that confirmed what I already knew. Grace would arrive each afternoon, always perfectly dressed, always bringing fresh flowers or magazines Martin couldn't read anymore, always touching him just a little too much. She'd brush invisible lint from his shoulder, smooth his hair, let her hand rest on his chest when she spoke to him, her voice dropping to that intimate whisper I'd heard through the doorway. And Martin, dying, weak, barely able to lift his head, would come alive under her attention. His breathing would quicken, his eyes would brighten. 42 years of marriage, and I'd never seen him look at me like that. Not anymore. Not for a long time. I played my role perfectly. The exhausted wife, the devoted caregiver. Too tired to notice, too worn down to see. I'd bring them tea, adjust the thermostat, check Martin's vitals with gentle efficiency. Grace would thank me with that sweet smile of hers, all fake concern and false sympathy. "You should rest, Clara," she'd say, her voice dripping with manufactured kindness. "You're doing so much. Let me sit with him for a while." And I'd smile back, my face a mask of gratitude. "You're so good to us, Grace. I don't know what we'd do without you." Lies. All lies. But I was learning to speak her language. One afternoon, while Grace was in the bathroom, I noticed her phone sitting on the side table, screen glowing with a new message. My hand moved before my brain could stop it. Just a quick glance. That's all. But what I saw made my blood run cold. A voice message from Martin's number. The phone Grace had been helping him use when his hands got too weak. I pressed play, volume low, my heart hammering against my ribs. Martin's voice, rasping but clear. We need to talk before she finds out. Grace, I can't keep... The bathroom door creaked. I dropped the phone back where it was, my pulse thundering in my ears. Grace emerged, fixing her lipstick, oblivious. She picked up her phone without looking at it, slipping it into her purse with casual ease. I should get going, she said, her tone light and breezy. Dinner won't cook itself, but I'll be back tomorrow, Martin. Same time. She kissed his forehead, slow, deliberate, possessive, and I had to grip the bed rail to keep from lunging at her. My knuckles went white, my nails bit into my palms, but my face stayed calm, serene, the perfect picture of a grateful mother-in-law. After she left, I sat in the chair by Martin's bed, studying him in the fading afternoon light. His eyes were closed now, his breathing shallow. He looked so fragile, so pitiful, so guilty. Mercy, I whispered to the empty room, my voice barely audible. What have you done to me? But mercy wasn't the word I was really thinking. Not anymore. That night, I went home to the farmhouse we'd shared for 4 decades. The place felt hollow. Every room held memories I couldn't trust anymore. Every photograph on the wall felt like a lie. I walked through the darkness, not bothering with lights, and found myself in our bedroom, staring at our wedding photo on the dresser. We'd been so young, so hopeful, so stupid. I picked up the frame, studying Martin's face. Decades younger, bright with promises he'd eventually break. My finger traced the glass, and I felt something shift inside me. Something cold and sharp and calculating. This wasn't just about an affair, this was bigger, deeper. I could feel it in my bones, in the way Grace moved around Martin, in the careful way she'd positioned herself in our lives. This was about something more than stolen kisses and whispered secrets. This was about destruction, calculated, deliberate, and I was standing right in the crosshairs. I set the photo down, face flat against the dresser. Then I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Louise Harper, my oldest friend, retired medical investigator, woman who'd spent 30 years sniffing out fraud and corruption in hospitals across New England. She answered on the second ring, her voice rough with sleep. Clara? It's past midnight. What's wrong? I took a breath, steadying myself. I need your help, Lou. Something's happening. Something bad. A pause. Then her voice sharpened, alert. Tell me everything. And I did. Louise arrived at dawn, her silver Subaru crunching over the frost-covered driveway like a promise of war. She'd always been the type to show up when it mattered. No questions asked, no judgments made, just action. I watched her from the kitchen window, clutching my 3rd cup of coffee, my hands finally steady after a sleepless night. She climbed out of the car with that same no-nonsense stride I remembered from our hospital days, her gray hair pulled back tight, her jaw set with determination. When I opened the door, she pulled me into a hug that smelled like cigarettes and drugstore soap, real, solid, safe. Show me, she said quietly, her voice all business now. No pity, no coddling, just the clinical focus of someone who'd spent decades digging through lies for a living. I led her to the dining room table where I'd laid out everything. Martin's medical files, insurance documents, prescription records, bank statements I'd pulled from our home office in the dead of night. The evidence of our life together, spread out like autopsy results. Louise sat down slowly, pulling on her reading glasses. She picked up the first document, a life insurance policy I'd never seen before. Her finger traced the signature line at the bottom, and I watched her face change. Harden, that's not your signature, she said flatly, holding it up to the morning light streaming through the window. No, I replied, my voice sharp as broken glass. It's not. But it looked close. Damn close. Someone had studied my handwriting, practiced the loops and curves, the way my C connected to my L in Clara. The forgery was good, professional, deliberate. Louise set it down carefully, like it might explode. When was this policy taken out? 8 months ago. I sat down across from her, my legs suddenly weak. Right after Martin's diagnosis. $2 million, Lou, payable to me upon his death. Her eyes met mine over the rim of her glasses. Except you didn't sign it. No. And I never saw a dime of the premium payments. I pulled out another document, bank statements showing automatic withdrawals from an account I didn't recognize. Martin had a separate account, one he never told me about. Grace helped him set it up. The pieces were clicking together now, audible almost, like tumblers in a lock. Louise spread out the papers, creating a timeline, her investigator's brain already building the case. Premium payments, doctor's visits, prescription changes, Grace's increasingly frequent presence in our lives. She's been planning this, Louise muttered, more to herself than to me. Her pen scratched across a notepad, connecting dots I couldn't see yet. How long has the affair been going on? The word affair hit me like a physical blow. Hearing it spoken out loud made it real, undeniable. I don't know, I admitted, my throat tight. Months, maybe. I was so focused on keeping Martin comfortable, I didn't see what was happening right in front of me. Louise reached across the table and gripped my hand. Her palm was warm, her fingers strong. That's what she counted on, Clara. Your compassion, your mercy. She weaponized it. I pulled my hand back, anger flaring hot in my chest. She used my kindness to destroy me. Not destroy, Louise corrected firmly, her eyes blazing now. She tried, but she underestimated you. Big mistake. We spent the next 3 hours dissecting every document, every transaction, every small inconsistency. Louise made calls to contacts she still had in medical administration, her voice professional and detached, asking questions that sounded innocent but weren't. She knew how to dig, how to extract information without raising alarms. By noon, we had the outline of their scheme. Grace had convinced Martin, sick, scared, desperate Martin, that I would abandon him when the medical bills got too high, that I'd been complaining about money, about burden, about wanting my freedom back. All lies, of course. But Martin, in his weakened state, with cancer eating through his reasoning, had believed her. She'd positioned herself as his savior, his comfort, his secret. She told him they could start over, I said, my voice hollow. That after I was gone, they'd be free. Louise looked up from her notes, her expression grim. Gone how, Clara? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications I didn't want to face, but I forced myself to think it through, to follow the logic to its terrible conclusion. The policy pays double for accidental death, I said slowly, the realization crystallizing like ice in my veins. Louise went very still. Jesus. She wasn't just stealing from me, I continued, my voice gaining strength now, clarity cutting through the fog of betrayal. She was planning to erase me. Make it look like an accident, collect the insurance money, and run off with my dying husband. The absurdity of it should have been funny. A woman in her 30s running away with a man who could barely breathe on his own. But there was nothing funny about the cold calculation behind it. The sheer audacity. The evil. Louise closed her notebook with a sharp snap. We need more. Hard evidence. Recordings, documents, something that proves intent. Then we'll get it, I said, my voice steady now, purpose replacing pain. Grace thinks I'm just some tired old woman, too grief-stricken to notice what's happening. She thinks mercy makes me weak. I stood up, gathering the documents with careful precision. My hands didn't shake anymore. My mind was clear, cold, focused. She's about to learn, I continued, my voice dropping to something that was almost a promise, that mercy and weakness are not the same thing. Louise smiled then, a sharp, predatory grin that reminded me why we'd been friends for 40 years. What do you need me to do? I looked at her, this fierce woman who'd dropped everything to help me and felt something click into place, a strategy, a plan, a way forward that didn't involve tears or begging or collapse. Help me make them confess, I said simply. Every word, every lie, every betrayal. I want it all on record. Consider it done, Louise replied, already pulling out her phone. And just like that, the game changed. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the hunter. And Grace, beautiful, clever, vicious Grace, had no idea she was already caught in my trap. The first recording device was smaller than my thumbnail. Louise taped it under Martin's bedside table while I distracted the day nurse with questions about meal schedules. It felt like espionage, like something from a movie, except this was my life, my marriage, my betrayal being documented in real time. "It's voice-activated," Louise whispered as we left the hospice that afternoon, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. "High quality. Legal in Vermont as long as one party consents, and Martin's your husband, so technically his room is your jurisdiction too." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. My hands were shaking again, but not from fear this time, from anticipation, from the dark thrill of finally taking control. The waiting was torture. I went through the motions of my daily routine, grocery shopping, paying bills, visiting Martin, while the recorder captured everything. Every whispered conversation, every intimate moment, every damning word. I became an actress, a performer in my own life. When Grace arrived each afternoon with her fake smile and her poisonous perfume, I greeted her warmly, gratefully, like the devoted mother-in-law I'd always been. "Thank you for coming, Grace," I'd say, my voice soft with exhaustion that wasn't entirely fake. "He lights up when you're here." And she'd eat it up, preening under what she thought was my ignorance. She'd pat my shoulder with false sympathy, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "You need to rest, Clara," she'd insist, practically pushing me toward the door. "Let me handle things for a while. You've been carrying this burden alone for too long." Burden. That word. As if Martin was some weight I was desperate to shed, as if our 42 years meant nothing, as if she was doing me a favor by stealing my dying husband. I'd leave the room, but I never went far. Just down the hall, close enough to watch through the partially open door to see her transform the moment she thought she was alone with him. The mask would slip. Her body language would change, looser, more intimate, predatory. And Martin, God. Martin would reach for her with trembling hands, his eyes bright with something that used to be mine. At night, Louise and I would meet at her apartment, hunched over her laptop, listening to the recordings through headphones. The first few sessions were mundane, Grace reading to Martin, adjusting his pillows, small talk about weather and meals. But on the fourth day, we struck gold. Grace's voice came through clear and sharp, pitched low but urgent. "The policy will cover everything, Martin. $2 million. We'll pay off your debts, my debts, everything, and then we start fresh." My hands clenched into fists. Louise reached over and squeezed my shoulder, her face grim. Martin's response was harder to hear, his voice weak and raspy from the cancer. "But what if Clara finds out before I die? Before we can—" Grace's laugh was soft, almost mocking. "Don't worry about that, darling. She's too trusting, too exhausted. She'll never figure it out. Now rest. You need your strength." There was a pause. The sound of liquid being poured, a syringe clicking. Then Grace's voice, soothing and false. "Just a little something to help you sleep. You've been so restless lately." Martin murmured something unintelligible. His breathing began to slow, deepen, the medication working fast. Louise and I exchanged glances. "She just drugged him," Louise whispered, her eyes wide. We kept listening. Minutes passed. Martin's breathing turned into soft snoring. Then Grace's voice came again, but different now, colder, crueler, like she'd dropped the mask completely. "What if she finds out before you die?" Grace said, her tone mocking, conversational, as if speaking to someone who could hear her. "Then I'll accelerate the timeline. I've been researching. It wouldn't take much. A medication error. A pillow held a little too long. She's exhausted, Martin. I'll make everyone believe Clara finally snapped and smothered you in a mercy killing. The casual cruelty of it, whispering about ending his life as he lay unconscious, made my blood run cold. This wasn't just fraud. This wasn't just an affair. This was premeditated murder, being planned in that quiet hospice room while Martin slept, oblivious. Grace hummed softly, the sound of her moving around the room. "You won't even know, will you?" Sleeping like a baby while I plan the perfect crime. But don't worry, darling. Your insurance money will be well spent. I've already picked out the villa in the Caymans. My vision went white at the edges. Louise grabbed my hand, anchoring me to reality. "That bitch!" Louise hissed, her voice shaking with rage. "She's planning to murder him and then frame you, and Martin doesn't even know." But I was already thinking past the shock, past the fear. An idea was forming. Dark. Dangerous. Perfect. "No," I said slowly, a grim smile spreading across my face. "She's not going to murder Martin. Because I'm going to murder him first." Louise's head whipped toward me, her eyes wide. "Clara—" "Not really," I clarified quickly, my mind racing now, pieces clicking together. "But she needs to think he's dead. We need her to believe it, to act on it, to file the insurance claim, to show her hand completely." Understanding dawned on Louise's face. "You want to fake his death?" "I want to give her exactly what she's been waiting for," I replied, my voice hard with determination. "And then I want to watch her hang herself with her own greed." Over the next week, I transformed into someone I didn't recognize, someone cold, calculating, capable of things I'd never imagined. I studied Martin's medications with new eyes, not as a caregiver, but as a strategist. I researched cardiac episodes, temporary cessations of heartbeat, the delicate dance between life and death that I'd witnessed hundreds of times in my career. I knew how to make someone appear dead, just for a moment, just long enough. Grace continued her visits, oblivious. She'd arrive with fresh flowers, white lilies, funeral flowers, I realized with sick irony, and sit beside Martin for hours, whispering promises of freedom, of new beginnings, of a life without me in it. And I'd play my part, the exhausted wife, the trusting fool. I'd bring them tea with shaking hands, apologize for my forgetfulness, accept Grace's offers of help with pathetic gratitude. "You're so good to us," I'd tell her, my voice breaking just enough to sound authentic. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Grace." She'd hug me then, and I'd smell her perfume, that same cloying vanilla scent that had soaked into Martin's sheets. And I'd hug her back, thinking about how much I was going to enjoy watching her world collapse. The recordings piled up. Grace talking about investment strategies for the insurance money. Grace researching flights to the Cayman Islands. Grace laughing about how easy it had been to manipulate that old fool and his pathetic wife. Each word was another nail in her coffin, each lie another link in the chain I was building around her. On a Thursday afternoon, while Grace was in the hospice bathroom freshening her makeup, I adjusted Martin's medication drip. Just slightly, just enough. My hands were steady. My conscience was clear. This wasn't murder, this was justice. Martin's eyes met mine, and for just a second I saw recognition there. Fear, maybe even remorse. "I'm sorry," he mouthed silently, his lips barely moving. I leaned close, my voice a whisper only he could hear. "You should be." Then I pressed the button that would slow his heart just enough to fool anyone who wasn't looking closely. And I walked out of that room knowing that Grace's nightmare was about to begin. Martin's heart monitor flatlined at exactly 3:47 in the afternoon. The sound, that long, piercing scream of mechanical death, sent nurses running from every direction. But I was already there, standing calm and composed beside his bed, my hand resting gently on his chest. Grace burst through the door seconds later, her face a perfect mask of shock and grief. But I saw it. That flicker. that split-second flash of triumph in her eyes before she remembered to look devastated. She was good, I'll give her that. The performance was flawless. "No!" she gasped, her voice breaking beautifully as she rushed to Martin's side. "No, no, please!" Dr. Samuel Logan arrived last, his footsteps heavy and slow. He was the head of hospice, a kind man with tired eyes and hands that had guided hundreds of people through their final moments. I'd known him for 15 years, trusted him, respected him. But when he looked at Martin's monitor, then at me, something flickered across his face. Something wrong. Guilty. "I'm sorry, Clara," he said quietly, his voice professionally somber but his eyes avoiding mine. "He's gone." The nurses backed away respectfully, giving us space to grieve. Grace collapsed into the chair beside Martin's bed, her shoulders shaking with sobs that sounded almost real. She reached for his hand, clutching it to her chest like she had any right to touch him. I stood there watching her performance, my face carefully neutral, while inside I was counting. 60 seconds. That's how long the medication would suppress Martin's heart rate to almost nothing. 60 seconds of apparent death before his system would stabilize again. I'd timed it perfectly. Dr. Logan moved toward Martin with his stethoscope, and I saw his hand trembling slightly. Fear. He was afraid. Of what? I didn't know yet. But I was going to find out. "I'll need to examine him," Dr. Logan said softly, gesturing for Grace and me to step back. "And then we'll need to call the funeral home, discuss arrangements." "Of course," I murmured, my voice hollow with false grief. "Whatever needs to be done." Grace stood up, wiping her eyes with theatrical precision. "I'll help with the arrangements, Clara." "You shouldn't have to handle this alone?" "I bet you will," I thought grimly. "Can't wait to file that insurance claim, can you?" But out loud, I just said, "Thank you, Grace. You've been such a comfort." The words tasted like poison on my tongue. Louise was waiting in the parking lot when I finally left the hospice 3 hours later. I climbed into her car, my legs weak with exhaustion and adrenaline, and she handed me a thermos of coffee without a word. "It worked?" she asked quietly, pulling out onto the dark road. "Perfectly," I replied, my hands wrapped around the thermos for warmth. "Martin's alive, stable. The medication wore off exactly as planned, but they think he's dead." Louise let out a long breath. "And Grace took the bait? Like a shark smelling blood." I took a sip of coffee, bitter and strong. "She's already talking about funeral arrangements." "Moving fast. She wants him cremated within 48 hours. "Of course she does," Louise muttered darkly. "No body, no evidence." We drove in silence for a moment, the headlights cutting through the darkness. Then Louise spoke again, her voice careful. "There's something else you need to know." "About Dr. Logan." I turned to look at her, my stomach knotting. "What about him?" "I did some digging today. Called in some favors with friends at medical licensing." She paused, her jaw tight. "Dr. Logan's been having financial problems, bad investments, gambling debts. His license was almost suspended last year." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. "Grace got to him." "Looks that way," Louise confirmed grimly. "I think she bribed him to falsify Martin's death certificate. Make it official. No autopsy. No questions." Rage burned through my chest, hot and clean. That bastard. I trusted him. "Most corrupt people count on that," Louise said quietly. "Trust is a weapon for people like Grace. She knows how to spot the vulnerable ones and exploit them." We pulled into Louise's apartment complex, parking under a flickering streetlight. I sat there for a moment staring out at the darkness, feeling the weight of everything I'd learned pressing down on me. "We need to confront him," I said finally, my voice hard with determination. "Tonight, before he has a chance to file that death certificate." Louise nodded slowly. "You sure you're ready for this?" I thought about Martin lying in that hospice bed, his life hanging by a thread. About Grace, probably celebrating her supposed victory right now. About Dr. Logan, selling his integrity for money he'd gambled away. "I'm ready," I said firmly. "Let's go." Dr. Logan lived in a modest house on the edge of town, the kind of place that spoke of better days and broken dreams. Lights were on in the living room when we pulled up. Through the window, I could see him sitting at his desk, head in his hands. He looked like a man drowning. Good. I knocked on the door 3 times, sharp and purposeful. When he opened it, his face went pale as death. He knew. Somehow, he already knew why I was there. "Clara," he stammered, his voice shaking. "What are you—" "We need to talk, Samuel," I said calmly, pushing past him into his house without waiting for an invitation. Louise followed, closing the door behind us with a definitive click. Dr. Logan backed away, his hands raised defensively. "Listen, I can explain." "Then explain," I said coldly, my voice cutting through his panic like a scalpel. "Explain how Grace Bell convinced you to falsify my husband's death certificate. Explain how much she paid you. Explain how a doctor I've known for 15 years decided to participate in insurance fraud and attempted murder." His face crumpled. "It's not." "I didn't know about the murder part, I swear." "But you knew about the fraud," Louise interjected sharply, pulling out her phone and holding it up. "Which is a felony, doctor. You'll lose your license, your pension, everything." Dr. Logan sank into his chair, his body collapsing in on itself. He looked 10 years older suddenly, all the life drained out of him. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "She said it was just paperwork, just making things easier for everyone, that Martin was going to die anyway, and Clara—" He looked at me with desperate, pleading eyes. "She said you wanted it too, that you were tired of watching him suffer." "And you believed her?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "She offered me $50,000, he admitted, his voice breaking. "I'm losing my house, Clara. My wife left me. I've got nothing left except this job, and I can barely hold on to that." Silence filled the room, heavy with judgment and despair. I looked at this man, this broken, compromised man, and felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding, maybe, of how Grace had exploited his weakness just like she'd exploited Martin's fear and my mercy. I walked closer to him, my voice dropping to something almost gentle. "You believe in mercy, don't you, Samuel?" He looked up at me, confused. "What?" "Mercy," I repeated softly, crouching down so we were eye level. "You've spent your career offering mercy to dying patients. Dignity, peace. You understand what it means." "Yes," he whispered, tears streaming down his face now. "God, yes." "Then don't let it rot in your hands," I said firmly, my voice hardening again. "Don't let Grace turn your mercy into corruption. Help me stop her. Help me make this right." Dr. Logan stared at me for a long moment, something breaking open in his expression. Then, slowly, he nodded. "What do you need me to do?" I smiled, a cold, satisfied smile that had nothing to do with kindness. "Give Louise everything. The forged documents, the payment records, every communication with Grace. Everything." "And then," he asked, his voice small. "And then you testify," I replied simply. "You tell the truth. And maybe, you get to keep some shred of your soul." The church was perfect. Too perfect. White lilies everywhere, their sickly sweet fragrance so thick it made my throat close. Grace had spared no expense on Martin's funeral, which would have been touching if I didn't know she was spending it all in anticipation of a $2 million payday. I stood at the entrance in my black dress, greeting mourners with appropriate solemnity. Neighbors I'd known for decades, Martin's old law colleagues, friends from church. They hugged me, whispered condolences, told me how sorry they were for my loss, and I smiled sadly, thanked them graciously, played my role with Oscar-worthy precision. Grace arrived fashionably late, dressed in elegant black that probably cost more than my car. Her makeup was flawless, Just the right amount of smudged mascara to suggest tears without looking messy. She'd even worn pearls. Martin's mother's pearls, the ones I'd given her last Christmas. The audacity nearly took my breath away. She walked straight to me, arms outstretched, her face radiating synthetic sympathy. "Oh, Clara," she breathed, pulling me into a hug that smelled like her poisonous perfume. "How are you holding up?" "One moment at a time," I replied softly, my voice trembling just enough to sound authentic. "I couldn't have gotten through this without you, Grace." She squeezed my hands, her eyes glistening with false tears. "He loved you so much, Clara. Never forget that." The lie was so brazen, so utterly shameless, that I almost laughed, but I just nodded, letting my lips quiver, letting her think she'd won. The sanctuary filled slowly. Soft organ music played. Something generic and mournful. The casket sat at the front, closed and empty, except for weighted bags to make it feel authentic. Martin was actually 2 floors below us, in the church basement, alive and breathing and guarded by Louise's nephew, who happened to be a paramedic. The irony wasn't lost on me. Pastor Richards began the service with appropriate gravity, reading scripture about eternal rest and heavenly peace. People dabbed at their eyes. Grace sat in the front row beside me, occasionally reaching over to squeeze my hand with theatrical compassion. I sat there thinking about the USB drive in my purse, about the recording equipment Louise had installed throughout the church last night, about the moment, coming soon, so soon, when everything would shatter. The pastor invited people to share memories. Martin's old partner from the law firm stood up, told a story about a case they'd won together 30 years ago. A neighbor talked about Martin's kindness, how he'd helped her after her husband died. Grace wept delicately into a tissue. Each eulogy felt like fingernails on a chalkboard. These people were mourning a lie, grieving a death that hadn't happened, all because Grace had decided my husband was worth more dead than alive. Finally, Pastor Richards nodded to me. "Clara has prepared something special," he announced gently, "a tribute to Martin's life and their love." I stood up slowly, my legs steady now, my heart beating with cold purpose. I walked to the podium, facing the congregation, seeing their sympathetic faces, their tears, their genuine sorrow, and I felt nothing but rage. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice soft and measured. Martin would have been touched by this turnout. He always said he was a lucky man, surrounded by people who cared. Grace nodded encouragingly from her seat, her face the picture of supportive grief. "Marriage is built on trust," I continued, my hands gripping the podium, "on honesty, on the belief that the person you've chosen will stand by you through everything, sickness and health, better or worse." A few people murmured agreement. Someone in the back row blew their nose. "Martin and I had 42 years together," I said, my voice growing stronger now. "I thought I knew him. Thought I knew what he valued, what he believed in." I paused, letting the silence stretch. Grace shifted uncomfortably in her seat, perhaps sensing something off in my tone. "But sometimes," I continued, my voice hardening, "we don't know people as well as we think we do. Sometimes the people we trust most are capable of betrayals we never imagined." Grace's head snapped up, her eyes meeting mine. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her face. Fear, maybe. Good. I pulled the small remote control from my pocket, the one Louise had given me last night. "Martin wanted me to share something with all of you," I said calmly. "A final message about truth and mercy and the price of lies." I pressed the button. The screens on either side of the altar, installed yesterday for what Grace thought was a memorial slideshow, blazed to life. But instead of family photos, they showed security footage from the hospice. Crystal clear. Damning. Grace's voice filled the church, amplified through the sound system. "The policy will cover everything, Martin. 2 million. We'll pay off your debts, my debts, everything. And then we start fresh. Gasps rippled through the congregation. Heads turned toward Grace, who'd gone white as the lilies surrounding the casket. Martin's weak voice responded, "She'll never sign." She's not stupid, Grace. She already did. I forged her signature months ago. The church erupted. Whispers became shouts. Someone stood up, pointing at Grace. Pastor Richards gripped the pulpit, his face slack with shock. But I wasn't done. The second recording played. Newer, from just 3 days ago. Grace's voice cold and calculating. Then I'll accelerate the timeline. I've been researching. It wouldn't take much. A medication error. A pillow held a little too long. She's exhausted, Martin. I'll make everyone believe Clara finally snapped and smothered you in a mercy killing. Grace shot to her feet, her face twisted with panic and rage. No! You're lying. This is edited? I finished for her, my voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Fabricated? No, Grace. It's real. Every word, every plan, every lie you whispered while I was supposed to be too tired to notice. She backed away from me, stumbling against the pew. You can't do this to me. I stepped down from the podium, walking toward her with slow, deliberate steps. The congregation parted like water, everyone staring at us, at this collision of truth and deception. I already have, I said quietly, my voice barely audible over the chaos but somehow reaching everyone. You thought mercy made me weak. You thought compassion made me blind. You used the gentlest parts of me as weapons against me. Grace's face contorted with desperation. He wanted this. Martin wanted me. He was tired of you, tired of playing the devoted husband. Martin was dying, I interrupted, my voice sharp as breaking ice, scared, vulnerable. And you exploited that. You made him believe lies about me, about us, so you could steal what we'd built together. Tears streamed down Grace's face now. Real ones, finally, born from fear instead of performance. I loved him, she choked out, her voice breaking. No, I replied coldly. You loved his money, his insurance policy, the future you thought you could steal from me. The church doors opened, police officers entered, their presence official and final. Grace saw them and collapsed, her legs giving out, her whole body shaking with sobs that no one believed anymore. As they handcuffed her, reading her rights in calm, professional tones, she looked at me one last time. Her makeup was ruined now, her elegance shattered. All that remained was the small, greedy thing she'd always been underneath. Mercy doesn't hide the truth, Grace, I said softly as they led her away. It reveals it, burns away everything false until only honesty remains. Her screams echoed through the church as they took her outside. Then silence fell, heavy and absolute. Everyone stared at me. This woman they'd thought they knew, who just orchestrated the most devastating exposure they'd ever witnessed. Pastor Richards approached me carefully, his face pale. Clara, is Martin really alive? I confirmed, my voice steady. Downstairs, weak but breathing. The death was staged to expose Grace's true intentions. More gasps, more shock, but underneath it I could feel something else. Respect, maybe even awe. I'd done what needed to be done, and I wasn't finished yet. The courtroom smelled like old wood and stale coffee. I'd been in this building only once before, 40 years ago, watching Martin defend a client accused of fraud. He'd won that case, stood up there in his sharp suit, arguing about truth and justice with such conviction that I'd fallen in love with him all over again. Now I sat in the gallery, watching that same system prepare to judge him. Grace's trial came first. 3 weeks after the funeral, that wasn't. The prosecutor was a young woman with steel in her eyes and evidence stacked so high it could have reached the ceiling. Forged documents, audio recordings, financial transfers, bank statements showing the $50,000 she'd paid Dr. Logan. It was almost beautiful, the way it all fit together. A perfect puzzle of corruption and greed. Grace sat at the defense table looking nothing like the elegant woman who'd walked into that church. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, no pearls. She wore a gray suit that made her look small and ordinary, defeated. Her lawyer tried. I'll give him that. He argued coercion, claimed Grace had been manipulated by Martin, suggested she was just as much a victim as anyone. But when they played the recordings in court, her voice cold and calculating, planning Martin's murder like it was a grocery list, the jury's faces hardened. You can't spin that kind of evil into sympathy. The hardest part was when they called me to testify. Walking up to that witness stand, placing my hand on the Bible, swearing to tell the truth. I looked at Grace as I sat down, and she stared back at me with such pure hatred that I actually felt it physically, like ice water in my veins. The prosecutor asked me to describe finding the forged insurance policy, to explain the moment I realized my daughter-in-law was planning to kill me, to detail how it felt, knowing my dying husband had participated in this betrayal. I answered every question calmly, clearly, my voice never wavering. But inside, I was bleeding. Each word opened the wound a little wider. Each memory cut a little deeper. When Grace's lawyer cross-examined me, he tried to make me sound vengeful, calculated, as if staging Martin's death made me somehow as guilty as her. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Bell," he asked smugly, adjusting his glasses, "that you deliberately deceived Ms. Bell? That you manipulated her into incriminating herself?" I looked at him for a long moment. Then I smiled, soft and sad and utterly exhausted. "I gave her every opportunity to tell the truth," I replied quietly. "Every moment to confess, to stop. She chose greed instead. I just made sure everyone could see it clearly." The jury nodded. They understood. Grace had made her choices long before I'd made mine. When the verdict came down, guilty on all counts, 15 years in prison, Grace's scream echoed through the courtroom like something wounded and dying. Security had to drag her out while she sobbed, her face twisted with rage and despair. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not relief, just emptiness where something used to be. But Grace's trial was only the beginning. Martin had been moved back to the hospice after the funeral, his condition deteriorating rapidly. The stress of everything, the exposure, the shame, the knowledge that his betrayal was now public, had accelerated his decline. Dr. Logan said he had days, maybe a week at most. I visited him once after Grace's sentencing, walked into that familiar room with its antiseptic smell and mechanical beeping. He lay there looking impossibly fragile, his skin translucent, his breathing labored. When he saw me, tears slid down his hollow cheeks. "Clara," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry." I stood at the foot of his bed, my hands gripping the rail, looking at this man I'd loved for 42 years, this stranger who'd betrayed everything we'd built together. "Why?" I asked simply, the only question that mattered. Martin closed his eyes, struggling to breathe, to speak. I was scared. The cancer, the pain, the knowledge that I was dying. "Grace said you were tired of me, that you complained about the burden, that you'd be relieved when I was gone." "And you believed her," I said flatly. Not a question, a statement. "She made me feel alive again," he admitted, his voice breaking. "Young. Wanted." I was so afraid of dying alone, Clara, so terrified of being forgotten. The honesty of it should have hurt more than the lies, but I was empty now, hollowed out by too much truth. "You weren't alone," I whispered, my voice cracking despite myself. "You were never alone. I was there, every day, every night, holding your hand, loving you even when you couldn't love yourself. "I know," he sobbed. "I know. Grace made me do it. She manipulated everything." "No," I interrupted sharply, my voice hardening. "Don't do that. Don't make yourself the victim. You chose this, Martin. You signed those papers. You forged my name. You whispered promises to her while I was changing your sheets." He opened his mouth to argue, but a coughing fit seized him. Blood flecked his lips. His heart monitor began beeping erratically. I should have called for the nurse. Should have helped him. But I just stood there, watching him struggle, feeling nothing but cold detachment. Finally, the fit passed. He lay there gasping, his eyes wild with pain and fear. "Please," he begged, his voice thin as paper. "Forgive me. I can't die like this. Not with you hating me." I looked at him for a long time. This man who'd given me 4 decades of memories, who'd held me through my mother's death, who'd danced with me at our daughter's wedding, who'd promised to love me until death did us part, and then threw it all away for a woman who saw him as a paycheck. "I don't hate you, Martin," I said finally, my voice soft but empty of warmth. "I pity you. You were weak when you needed to be strong. You were a coward when you needed to be brave. Grace didn't make you do anything. She just showed you who you really were underneath all those years of pretending to be a good man." He made a sound then, something between a sob and a moan. "Clara, please." "But," I continued, my voice gentler now, softer, "you were mine once. For a long time, you were mine. And I loved you. I loved the man you used to be, the one who sang to me in the kitchen, who brought me flowers for no reason, who promised we'd grow old together with dignity." I walked closer, stood beside his bed, looked down at his ravaged face. That man deserves forgiveness. So I forgive him. But you? I shook my head slowly. You're just the shell he left behind. Martin closed his eyes, tears streaming steadily now. "I'm recording this," he whispered, his hand trembling as he pointed to a small device on his bedside table. "My confession. Everything I did. Why I did it. I want them to know. Grace coerced me, manipulated me, used my fear against me." "Will that make you feel better?" I asked quietly, "blaming her for your choices?" "It's the truth," he insisted weakly. "She promised we'd start over, that she'd take care of me, that we'd be happy. And you believed her," I said again, "because you wanted to. Because it was easier than facing your own mortality with the woman who actually loved you." He had no answer to that. Just more tears, more blood on his lips, more labored breathing. 2 days later, Martin's heart gave out for real. No staged death this time, no medication tricks, just the natural end of a life consumed by fear and betrayal. Dr. Logan called me at dawn. "He's gone, Clara," he said quietly, his voice thick with genuine sorrow. "He recorded a full confession before he died, exonerating you completely, taking responsibility for everything." "Good," I replied, my voice flat. "Send it to the prosecutor." I didn't go see his body, didn't arrange another funeral. Louise handled it all while I sat in my kitchen drinking coffee, staring out at the lake, feeling nothing but a strange, hollow relief. Martin was gone. Grace was in prison. The truth was exposed. Justice was served. So why did it feel like I'd lost everything? Spring came to Vermont like a whisper of forgiveness. Snow melted from the pines, revealing green underneath. The lake thawed, its surface catching sunlight like scattered diamonds. And I stood in my kitchen one morning, watching the world wake up, realizing I could breathe again. It had been 6 months since Martin's real death, 6 months since Grace's sentencing, 6 months of existing in a strange limbo between vindication and devastation. The house felt too big now, too quiet. Every room held ghosts, not of Martin, but of the woman I used to be, the one who believed mercy was always gentle, who thought love could survive anything, who trusted that doing right by people meant they'd do right by you. That woman was gone, burned away in the same fire that exposed Grace's lies. But something new was growing in the ashes. Louise found me one morning sitting on the back porch, coffee growing cold in my hands, staring at nothing. She didn't say anything at first, just sat down beside me, her presence solid and real and comforting. "You're not okay," she finally said, her voice matter-of-fact but gentle. "No," I agreed quietly. "I'm not." "You need purpose, Clara," Louise continued, her tone firm now. "Sitting here drowning in what happened isn't living. It's just slow dying." I looked at her, this fierce woman who'd stood by me through everything. What am I supposed to do, Lou? Go back to hospice? Pretend I can still offer comfort to dying strangers when I couldn't even protect my own marriage? "You exposed a criminal," Louise countered sharply. "You saved your own life. You brought justice to people who thought they were untouchable. That's not failure, Clara, that's strength." Her words settled into me slowly, like water seeping into dry ground. Maybe she was right. Maybe survival wasn't the end of the story. Maybe it was the beginning. That afternoon, we drove into town together. Louise had been researching grief counseling centers, places that help people navigate loss and betrayal. There weren't many in our area. The need was greater than the resources. "We could start one," Louise said casually, like she was suggesting we try a new restaurant. "You've got the medical background. I've got the investigative experience. We understand what it's like to be betrayed by the people you trust most." The idea took root immediately. A place for people drowning in their own grief, people who needed more than platitudes and sympathy, people who needed truth and solidarity and the knowledge that surviving wasn't weakness. We found a small building by the lake, an old counseling office that had been vacant for years. The rent was cheap. The location was perfect. Through the windows, you could see water and sky stretching endlessly, a reminder that pain doesn't last forever. We called it Willow Haven Grief Center, named after the hospice where everything had unraveled, a tribute to endings that led to new beginnings. The first few months were hard, learning to counsel instead of nurse, listening to stories that mirrored my own pain, holding space for anger and betrayal and the messy, complicated grief that comes when the dead don't deserve your tears. But slowly, something shifted. Each person who walked through our doors carrying unbearable weight would leave a little lighter. Each story of survival reminded me that I wasn't alone in this strange, hollow aftermath of justice. One afternoon, a woman came in, probably mid-60s, her face lined with exhaustion and rage. She discovered her husband's affair 3 weeks before he died of a stroke. Never got the chance to confront him, never got closure. "I'm so angry," she told me, her voice shaking with the force of it. "He's dead and I'm stuck here hating him. How do I forgive someone who can't even apologize?" I looked at her for a long moment, seeing myself reflected in her pain. Then I said something I'd been learning slowly, painfully, over the past months. "Forgiveness isn't for them," I told her gently. "It's not about letting them off the hook or pretending their betrayal didn't matter. Forgiveness is the choice to stop letting their sins poison your future." She stared at me, tears streaming down her face. "How do you do that? How do you just let it go?" "You don't let it go," I replied softly. "You transform it. You take that rage and grief and betrayal, and you use it to become someone stronger, someone who knows what real mercy looks like. Not blind compassion, but the courage to face truth even when it burns." She nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes, and I realized I wasn't just counseling her. I was counseling myself. That evening, I drove to the cemetery for the first time since Martin's burial. His grave sat under a willow tree, the headstone simple and clean. Louise had chosen the inscription without asking me, "Loved and forgiven," I stood there for a long time, feeling the spring breeze carry the scent of new grass and distant rain. The anger that had sustained me for so long felt distant now, faded. "You were weak," I said quietly to the stone, to the man beneath it, to the memory of who we used to be. "But you were mine once, and I loved you. That part was real, even if everything else turned out to be lies." A robin landed on the headstone, bright red against gray granite. It cocked its head, watching me with curious eyes. "I forgive you," I whispered, surprising myself with the truth of it. "Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to be free." The bird flew away, a flash of color against the blue sky, and something inside me, something that had been clenched tight for months, finally loosened. I walked back to my car feeling lighter, not healed, not whole, but moving in that direction, one step, one breath, one choice at a time. Louise was waiting at the grief center when I arrived, organizing files with her usual efficiency. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes searching my face. "You okay?" she asked carefully. "I went to his grave," I told her, setting down my purse. "Talked to him. Told him I forgive him." Louise studied me for a moment, then smiled, soft and understanding. "How'd that feel?" "Like putting down weight I didn't know I was carrying," I admitted. "Like maybe mercy isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about refusing to let it define who I become." "That's exactly right," Louise said firmly. She handed me a cup of tea, chamomile and honey, warm in my hands. "You survived, Clara. And now you're helping others survive. That's not revenge. That's redemption." We worked in comfortable silence for a while, preparing for the next day's sessions. Through the window, I could see the lake turning gold in the sunset, the water moving in gentle waves. My phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Logan, who'd testified at both trials and somehow kept his medical license. He'd started volunteering at the grief center, trying to rebuild his integrity one act of service at a time. The message was simple. "Group session tomorrow has 12 people signed up. We're making a difference." I smiled, typing back, "We are. Thank you." As I locked up the center that night, I paused at the door, looking back at the space we'd created. Chairs arranged in circles, tissues on every table, a sign that read, "Truth heals, lies destroy. You are not alone." The ashes of mercy were what remained when love survived betrayal. And somehow, impossibly, those ashes still glowed with warmth, with purpose, with the quiet strength of someone who'd walked through fire and emerged transformed. I drove home through the spring darkness, windows down, breathing in the scent of pine and possibility. Martin's farmhouse didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt like mine, a place I'd reclaimed, a foundation for whatever came next. Because mercy wasn't about forgiving sin. It was about refusing to become it. And I'd learned that lesson the hardest way possible. But I'd learned it, and I was still standing. And that, somehow, was enough.